Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and we get to talk history, like way back. Wait till you hear the story of this picture. But first, I would like you to meet the artist, and you are?
Cynthia Howard.
Cynthia, you have other names we saw written out. Would you like to give us the whole pedigree?
Well, it's actually because it's an Applegate, and then Applegate, McCurdy, Lovelace, Kellenbeck, Howard. So quite a long genealogy there.
So the family, we've had the Kellenbeck, so we have had the Applegates, because that's so much Oregon history. But not only just Oregon, I mean, the Applegates came down through Klamath and into California?
Well, actually, from Missouri is really where most people notarized them the most, coming out of Missouri during the Civil War and the slavery issues and things kind of drove them out west. And so that's kind of where most of our family picks it up. But the Applegates are an incredible family to be belonging to, because most of the families that I see around in my neighborhood and with kids and things, they don't have the same roots and heritage or don't really know as much about it. And our family really spends a lot of effort and energy making sure that we are all grounded in all of this wonderful heritage. And it gives us a great strength in times of things are not going well in life and stuff like this. It's really nice to have that behind you, to know that you can draw onto that in your life.
Because the Applegate story starts with a real sad chapter of the Columbia River.
Yes, absolutely. Where they lose part of their children in trying to find a better life for themselves. And they actually, risked a lot to come out here. It wasn't always as easy as people kind of think in the books and the movies that they see. There was a lot of risks and a lot of, they left a lot behind that they could have stayed in a very calm and sedate life, but they chose to move forward and create a different life for themselves. So it's a very impressive story. Because
they weren't willing to say this is the only way after the loss of those children.
That's right.
And I understand the Applegates are the first to go from west to east to find a way.
I'm not quite sure if that's part of the story.
The men settled the family.
That's true.
And left them.
That's right, that's right. And then they came back to get them.
And they came from the west and found a way through Klamath.
Yes.
And what's the next stops east?
Well, actually, what I understood is they came out originally, they followed Lewis and Clark out, the men did. Well, the women were back in Missouri. And they came down the typical path that Lewis and Clark followed, the Sacagawea Trail and all of that. And as they came down and explored, the Applegates were surveyors and kind of explorers. And they left the northern part of the state after the first winter and came down through the southern part and found what they called sweet grasslands, kind of the interesting comments that you see in the letters that they wrote back to their families. And so through the Douglas County and down through Ashland and those areas. And they wanted to find really a way that was a little more predictable for winters and different travels to get more people out here. So they went back west, you're right. They actually went from west back to east, and they explored a different route through California. They went through Klamath Falls, down and through northern California, out through part of Nevada, which is a little flatter, a lot less rugged to go over mountains and things. So, but that was part of their surveying adventure nature, I think. They said they had restless feet, is what I think the other description was always called of those relatives of that time.
Well, now you're talking the men had restless feet. What about the women?
And the women were the ground. They were the foundations of the family. And I have 6 daughters of my own, and it's kind of nice to have that behind, because the one thing that's very, very prominent in this family is that the women are extremely strong, extremely grounded. Actually, I would say the majority of us have a very strong religious base, a very strong family base, but we're also extremely independent, which has not always been popular in the times of certain things. But being that independent, when their men were off doing the exploring for months at a time, that independence also stayed the farm, kept everything going. So there's a good side to the independence of that time, too.
Okay, now they settled where?
They originally settled actually up in the Salem area. They came across, and they were up several places up near Salem, north of Salem and Portland. So
what brought them to southern Oregon?
Well, it's something they called the sweet grassland. As they explored south, they were doing surveying for Lewis and Clark and different pioneer people for trapping lines and things. and they found something they called sweetgrass. And the winters up north, of course, I just came from Portland, so I can tell you this, are extremely wet, extremely rainy, and it's kind of hard to have a really good crop season and things. And the weather down here was much more appealing to having, you know, farms and homesteads than it was actually up north. I think it was easier to have family life down here. It was easier to travel between houses and things than constant rain.
So the family home where your last reunion was held is in Yoncalla or Drain or?
Well, the most notable of the families of the three original brothers, and they were three that actually came out together, are in the Yoncalla Drain area, which is just north of Douglas County. And actually, Charles and a couple of the others, and Daniel actually did have some homesteads off and on down here in the Ashland area, some over in, I think they call it Clear Lake, which is across towards Klamath Falls. So they kind of migrated around. But the primary homestead where the women stayed, the foundation of the family, stayed in the Yoncalla Valley up there.
And that's where I was lucky enough to go to the reunion when it was out on the Applegate River. And your cousin,
Maybe cousin, yeah.
She raises llamas, and yes, just incredible. And this is the spread.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful ranch. It is.
It's been very interesting because I've met the Callenbecks in a different environment. You know, these different women in your family.
They're very dynamic, aren't they? Very, very profound in each way. Each one is very unique, I think, in our family.
But you said, how many girls did you have?
6.
And 2 of them came together.
Yes, I have twins. The last 2 are twins.
And, you know, I hear of women who train their children in certain ways, and I admire them. And I just think you ought to hear her story. When your girls are
18.
Okay, tell us about when your girls, 6 of them, have turned 18.
18. I had started this with the first twin. I felt that they all needed to know how to live life and pay bills and really go out there and have to be responsible and clean house and know what it's like to come home at the end of the day and not have, you know, all your food and dinner ready for you. So my tradition was to help them get all their furniture together, get their first apartment, go buy them and put the groceries in together. Get their dishes and all those things so they have the first place set up. And they were supposed to go out there and learn how to pay the bills. And remember that, you know, if you open up half the pop cans and drink half of it, the next time when you go to the refrigerator, there's nothing there. And so kind of really learn to be independent and stand on their own. Learn how to make the money and bring it home and, so to speak, make the bacon and eat it too, I think is the expression I've heard over the years. But I felt it was real important that they became very strong women in their own right, which was kind of how I was raised too. So I think our whole family has a very tradition of really having very strong women in many different directions, but very strong and independent.
Well, with 3 brothers gone on these journeys, how long did it take them? They would leave?
They would leave from anywhere from 4 to 8 months at a time and not be home. So in the winters, if you had to butcher cows and sheep and things and put up the stock for the winter and make jams and jellies and teach the children and all of the different things that are the routines of the day, all of the stores you need to make it in winter. At those times, you couldn't go down to 7-Eleven. You actually spent a lot of time really making sure that you could make it through winters and had your stores and stocks. And even the social part of the family, I think, with the music, and the Applegates are very notable for their musical type of talents too. So, you know, they would have gatherings where they would play fiddles and guitars and different things together as instruments.
Well, I was so privileged to go to the Applegate Trail reenactment that was held in Grave Creek. That's not what they call it anymore. They call it Sunny Valley.
Sunny Valley, yeah.
Sunny Valley has a wonderful museum called the Applegate Trail Museum. And to go there and see these wagons come in. I'd seen them come down our main street here on their way there. So I followed them the next day. They went out to Pottsville and camped, and then the next day they went on. It was torturous.
The trails and things. And you know, I've often, it's kind of interesting because I've done some illustrations for several family members who've written books about the family and the different aspects of it. And I often have stood at places, even because I've lived in Portland most of my life, stood in the Columbia Gorge and stood there and said, what was this like when they came down on these rafts? Or come down through the valley, through the Willamette Valley, and stood there and said, can I imagine what the Willamette must have been like at this time? What did this look like? And I often, so you really, it takes you back from when you see something like schooners and things, and you kind of sit there and go, wow, this was not easy. When you come down through the mountains, the 4 mountains coming from Canyonville down here, I think to myself, my gosh, they'd have to cut trees and go over rocks, and they would go several miles a day sometimes. What a tremendous amount of ambition and courage it takes to come every day to come that much next step, you know? This is pretty impressive.
When you're coming from Canyonville, you will see a canyon that had no freeway, no road, no trail.
That's right.
And they had to bring the wagons down the creek.
Yep.
And the walls of the creek are like this. You can still...
Well, they aren't even what we saw even today, because erosion and things really have actually made them more gentle. So a lot of the things I try to imagine are really quite severe and steep even then, because we don't have the canyons doesn't have quite the environmental things that we've done today with trees and all of the foresting and things. So I think it was even more severe than what we see.
So they took the wheels off, carried the wheels out, and then came the rains before the parade was all the way down, and then they had floodwaters, cold floodwaters. I think I found that in the Canyonville Museum, but in the Roseburg Museum, your cousin was there painting this gorgeous mural of what it was like.
Yeah, I think you really actually, it takes some imagination now, and Shannon, or I think it's Susan.
Right.
She's very good. So they have spent a lot of time researching, and their father was Charlie. That was their great-grandfathers. And they actually have a tremendous amount of things that were left through the family, are actually kept by them. They become quite the historians in the family.
Well,
and so she has some things for inspiration, but a lot of it, she really just sits there, just kind of like what I said, and really takes a moment to really imagine it must be like this. Even the Rogue River, I hear tales of things when the Rogue River ran so much in fish that you felt like you could walk across the top of it. And now, of course, we don't see that. So you really have to stop for a second and say, wow, this is really quite the difference in what I see today.
Well, if you go to that museum, you will see Susan's work, and it's simply spectacular. And I hope she'll be my guest on another show. But right now we're here to talk about you. What is it?
Yeah, this was actually something I had done, and I didn't make the book that I was doing, but I was doing this for my grandmother who had written a book. And I had never seen such a thing. All these years, of course, I have all these girls. I thought curling irons were these big things that you plugged in electricity yourself, but this is actually what the old-fashioned irons, and this one actually had added a cord attachment, but they used to put the irons on the stove and heat them up, and the back end, they had these curling rods that would go into the back of an iron. And that's where the name curling iron came from. And I never even realized that for the longest time that that's where the term had actually come from.
And this is the original sketch, and you brought it down for us. Handle it with care. But this one really takes me back. I mean, can you even imagine?
The old mop buckets.
Almost looks like a wooden bucket. Surely it's not.
No, it's an old mop bucket, and this was another scene that I was trying to depict. This was quite a few years ago. And the stool, those are more like the old milk stools I think they used to have. And I just had put together this with a little scene, because they were talking about in her days about what it was like to come in and milk the cows. And the only inspiration I had was a mop bucket, so that's all I used for this one here.
I just love it. This bunnies here, bunnies here. What's the story?
These are ducks, baby ducks.
Excuse me.
That's all right.
Well, of course they're ducks.
But these ducks, and actually there's another one here, if I can show you.
Oh.
These ducks actually were inspired by, these were Mother's Day gifts to my mother. And that's where I started these in. So I wanted to find something that was kind of more nurturing and so these were my brothers and sisters and I said, well, these are our kids in their yard, Mom. They're taking care of us here. So,
oh, and
so the baby ducks, these were in a knot hole. This is where I kind of got the old wood where they'd hidden in the hole because they were cold.
safe. Well, where I first learned about her, I found a Christmas tree with decorations. I should show you. Sand dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
What have you done with the sand dollars?
Well, we made snowmen. And this was, this last year, the Festival of Trees was looking for different people to sponsor a tree. And through my aunts and my mother, they are pretty active in the Three Rivers Community Hospital. So they had asked if I would be interested in putting together a tree. And one of the things that is very unique in my family with my girls is every year we would go on vacation, and from every place that we would go for that summer, we would find one thing and bring it back, and we would make a new, unique Christmas ornament. It was our tradition and heirloom. So we have about 30 different ones over the years, but that particular year we had gone out to the coast and found sand dollars and different things, so we had made different kinds of ornaments out of shells and things. So that became our inspiration for Festival of Trees this year.
And I got such a kick. The original one I saw had a tiny little sand dollar here. Where did the sand dollars come from?
Well, most of these sand dollars came from a dear friend of mine, her sister who lives in Coos Bay, and they had found them out on the pier. The little small ones actually came from Mexico.
Oh, and then she gilded the little gold ones. When I called her, she said, oh, well, you can have the two I have at home, but you've made other ornaments.
Oh, yeah. We made lots of different ones out of the different kinds of shells and sea urchins. We made little sea turtles, the big giant sea turtles out of the sea urchins. We made little wind chimes. We made angels out of clamshells.
There you go. Now, it's not just limited to these kinds of art things. Remember, 6 girls, and you have given each one of your daughters a very unique gift.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, I became pretty ill. And I was ill enough that I wasn't sure I was going to be around to see them grow up. And so I came up with this idea that I wanted to make sure that they would remember all the things that we had done together and things about their life. So I made something what I called a personal poster. And each child had something that was unique to the child.
Poster.
Personal poster. And this one is of actually the youngest one. She's one of the twins, but this is the youngest one. So in her case, she's a very delicate person. She's very light. You can kind of see from her photograph. So I came, for her, it was a fairy.
This is the little, and her name
she's
is?
20 years old there, but in the picture, when I did the painting, she was about 14, 15 years old, I think. Then.
Okay. And these things, each one is different. What is it?
So in the wings itself, I tried to find things about her life that were unique about her or things we had shared together. So in the very top of the wings, there's something that she's dyslexic, so there's some things with letters turned back and forth. And then she did ballet together with me, and there's a mountain in there at Lost Lake, someplace that her and I used to go special together all the time up in Portland. And then there's a meteor shower her and I did every year. We would go in August. There's a meteor shower called Perseid. She actually is an incredible artist herself. Out of all of my children, she is the most talented artist of all of us. And so there's something with art about her.
These are flowers?
Those are pansies. That was her favorite flower. That is her favorite flower.
And you have woven into this not only about this girl, but about your mothering her, yes. Your love for her. And each daughter gets one of these?
Each daughter, actually, I've completed them all now. So each daughter has something different. There's one that is a dragon, and she's the daughter who likes astrophysics types of things. So in hers, we have nebulas and pulsars and eclipses and different things for space. And it's a dragon, and it's up in the wings. There's all these different things about her. And another daughter liked butterflies, and she likes Egyptian things. So we did pyramids and all kinds of things from the Valley of the Kings and stuff like that. So each daughter got something that was unique to her.
Oh, I wished you'd look at me and say, oh, she's...
Well, I've done some for people. I actually have done some for friends and things, and I do them just for fun. It's not something I like to do for money or something like that. I do it because it's a pleasure and a joy for me.
Oh.
And as I explained to you that, for some people, they read books and they get so absorbed in the story that time goes by and all of a sudden they look up and say, my gosh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. For me, that's art. It's never been reading, but mine is art. So it's the pleasure I have. I kind of lose myself in it, and I get so fun and absorbed into what I'm doing, I lose track of my time. That's my pleasure.
You mentioned that you have done visuals for books.
Yes.
Now, these books are what?
Well, most of the books I've done some things actually for educational books for kids in grade schools. That was quite a few years ago. And those were more cartoons and types of things that were more for children. And these ones here, these are actually books that my different family members have written, or different friends have written for authors and stuff. And most of them are all in black and white, because if they do a color book, it's a very different thing. So they're paperbacks, they're done in black and white. So they tend to be pen and ink and pencil. But I do them because it's a love and a pleasure to me to do it. It's not something that I've done to make a living at, per se.
Well, but you mentioned Callenbeck's and the book.
The Annie story. This one, for example, is an Annie story.
Tell me about Annie's story.
Annie's story is actually my grandmother wrote that, and her name was Applegate McCurdy. So she was one generation back from them. And my grandmother wrote a story about Douglas County from about 1900 to actually about 1980. All the different things that went on in her life. And it's really pretty fun. I didn't think I would like it as much because it's family things, but honestly, she talked about things like, you know, laying in the pastures with cows and rubbing their bellies, and walking at night down to the barn dances and having to spend the night in town because they couldn't make it back at night out to the farm because there weren't street lights and things in covered streets. There were dirty streets and things, so you stayed in town at night. Things that I hadn't really thought about of what happened. And it really gives a good history of the valley and when the first phone came to the valley. How interesting that was, and the first time she'd seen a car coming down the roads and chugging and stuff. It was really kind of charming to kind of look at. It really gave you a good picture of what the valley was like.
And you have this comes from that book? This
comes from that book. She talked about all kinds of home remedies. My grandmother, I love her, and she has this one. She used baking soda for everything. Oh. Baking soda for teeth, baking soda for bad breath, upset stomach, bee bites. I mean, baking soda was like her miracle drug. So she talked about when they first had to go into the local, they didn't have them, they called them chemists, I think, originally? Mm. Yes. And so she talked about when they first actually started getting things that had labels on them. And these were things I'd done some research and looked at. And the original bottles and things, they would say for colic, for flatulence. And I was like, my gosh, can you imagine if they put something out there, Alka-Seltzer for flatulence? I don't think they'd sell that here anymore. It was quite fascinating. I mean, Band-Aids, 25 cents a box. I wish it was 25 cents a box still. So it was kind of interesting.
You have a bromo seltzer.
Yes.
Oh, I can remember that ad. And what are some of those others?
Let's see. This one, I don't have my glasses, and you have to do fully aspirin, which was the real old-fashioned aspirin that we have now. You know, it's not the stuff we have now. It's a little bit different. And most things were actually very liquids. There weren't very many hard pills. Oh. They didn't have the binders. Most of the original things when I did research were really liquids.
Tonics.
Tonics. There you go. That was it. There were tonics. And they had tonics for everything.
My husband's grandfather was a teetotaler. He never drank, but he had a model for medicine that was cinchona bark.
Cinchona bark? I've never heard of that.
Some tree bark. And then, of course, you had to add the spirits in that cinchona bark to make it medicine.
So what were spirits? That was the
alcohol. Hard liquor.
Corn liquor. Corn liquor.
Oh, I just... you know, what these pioneers did and how they kept well.
But you know, I think that I found most fascinating out of all of the history and you know, all the reunions and things we went to was that these people are incredibly happy people. That no matter, they didn't have all the things that we have now. They didn't have the video games and the TVs and things we have now. But they were extremely happy people. And the things that they found in life to feel good and happy about, they weren't people who were sad or struggling or in pain or those kinds of things that sometimes we see now with modern life that's added to it. The life was simpler. It was hard life. But their life was a happy life. And I find that really fascinating because now we have all these conveniences and things around us, and we're not always that happy.
Right.
It's quite a dichotomy. It's a very interesting thing. We're supposed to be happier now, right? Because we have all this luxury time, but I don't know if that's all that good.
You've hit on a good point. So when you think about what's the next thing I can buy, maybe we should think of what could I do with a sand dollar, or what could I do with This is just a pencil that you've done this artwork with?
Yes, right, this pencil.
And
there's lots of hours in it. And, you know, I work with 2nd and 3rd graders here at Lincoln Elementary School here in Grants Pass. And we call it the artist eye. That's what I teach them when we talk about it. So we look at, when I brought in, they actually made these sand dollars themselves. They made the snowmen for their Christmas project. And I have them look at something and say, okay, here's what we've got. Now, what are we going to make out of this today? And I want them to think beyond, what is this shape here? What is it? What does it look like to you? What's the imagination? And have them do a little more out-of-box kinds of things. And so I bring in things all the time that are a little abstract. We have one now where we take a picture that's already done. We're cutting it up in all kinds of different shapes and pulling it apart, pushing it in different directions. And they come up with very interesting and unique things. So they can see that you can take simple things and actually create other things from them. You can look at stuff with a little bit different eye than just the normal eye.
Well, now you don't live over here.
No.
You've got Douglas County roots. You live where?
Eagle Point.
Eagle Point is that burgeoning new community, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's still a pretty small town though. That's 2 streets. There's not much in it still.
When Camp White came, when the military base came, they just leveled little farms, paid them nickels and dimes, and built the cemeteries there, isn't it? The military.
The military cemetery, and it's a beautiful one. I will say that. It is very beautiful. There are a lot of pioneer cemeteries around here, and I would encourage people, the Applegate Cemetery that my family has, the family really takes it quite seriously and takes really good care of it. But some of the ones I've visited around the area here, the families or the communities really need to take some pride and step up and really, you know, make them what they should be.
Remember the way the Lord's led in the past. That's all I can say. These people were so courageous. And thank you for sharing. And we'll tell how to get a hold of the Applegate books. And you can go to your local library. You can go online, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Even your bookstore.
Yeah, and there's a new book coming out probably in the next 6 months about Jesse Applegate specifically that one of my relatives is writing currently, and I'm doing some illustrations for it, so you should look for it.
So look for those books. Learn more about our lovely, lovely history of Southern Oregon, Northern California, clear up to Columbia River.
Clear up to the Columbia River.
I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying thanks for tuning in, and thank you for being my guest.
It was my pleasure, and thank you.